Chapter 45. I don't like it here. Alcelon clutched his chest. Caleb watched him rub his arms together against the breeze as they stared into the fog from the top of the vaulted tower. He could make out the distant treetops of the forest beyond the field, but not much else. He could, however, hear the whinnying shrieks of the Calvar. Beside his brother, Lady Eve waited with her hands clasped. "Because we're trapped," Caleb answered. Alcelon scowled. "It's rude to be so blunt, brother, especially now." Caleb shrugged, finding politeness no longer a priority. His expression softened. "I don't like it either." "And they're just waiting." Alcelon pointed to the field below. Caleb cast a glance at Evelyn, who remained unmoving. He ran a hand through his hair. He balled a fist and whirled toward the stairwell as he heard the commotion of feet hammering up the stairs. Farallon and Anthros exploded into the tower. The Duke was trying to catch his breath. "I bring word. Feenan has returned." Caleb gasped. "He has? Just himself?" Farallon shook his head. "No. Feenan and the human Kelin with the half-breed boy and a couple of dwarves." "Dwarves?" the prince repeated, raising an eyebrow. "The boy is safe." A smile flittered across Evelyn's countenance. "How did they get through enemy lines into the castle?" Caleb demanded. The Knight of Indaleria's face was also flushed. "There were only a few enemy patrols behind the castle. They must have slipped through before the Kimmen were in place. Any word on Dare and Sir Jacob? No, and the Storm Readers may attack us at any moment." Caleb frowned as the knight slid his gaze to Farallon. The prince held his breath and nodded. Anthros straightened his shoulders as he faced Farallon. "From what we know, my Lord Duke, you were the one who sent word to the Kimmen that brought them here." "What?" Farallon paled and backpedaled. The Baroness retreated behind the knight. "No, the Duke has always been favourable to us. I have sensed nothing wicked from him." Anthros stepped forward, glaring at Farallon. "Our Kimmen prisoner informed us. And it is that Kimmen whom we cannot trust," Farallon thundered, balling his fists. "This is outrageous." "You thought that you should be king." Anthros's anger shone on his face. "That is why you launched the Kimmen at our royal family's throats in the onset of this madness. I did nothing of the sort. King Valadin was my dearest friend. I helped him and Thea build this kingdom." Caleb marched up to his duke and shoved him in the chest. "And then you mocked them. That's why they couldn't run." Alcelon gasped and rapidly shook his head, but he pressed his lips together and dropped his gaze. Tears stained his face. Caleb stomped forward as the Duke retreated toward the trap door. Farallon raised his hands. "No, my king! I loved the king and queen." "I don't believe you!" Veins bulged on Caleb's forehead and neck. Lady Evelyn, hurrying to escape the press of bodies, tripped over the hem of her dress and tumbled forward, flailing to catch on to something. Her finger scraped Anthros's cheek as he whirled to arrest her fall, leaving behind a thin scratch. "My lady," the knight helped her to stand upright. "I just felt faint, Sir Knight." Their attention swept back to the prince and the Duke. Caleb shoved the Duke again with all his might. He pushed a third time and the Duke tripped backward over the stairwell. He tottered, but was too far over the edge and he fell down the steps. Caleb ran to the opening and screamed, "Guards, lock him away! And if he resists, throw him to the Kimmen!" Growling under his breath, he stalked back to the tower's short wall and gripped it with white knuckles. "Where in the corners of hell is Silver Dawn?" "I was told at least a day out." Anthros grabbed his chest and grimaced. Caleb narrowed his gaze at the knight, but he said, "Send the survivors of the raid to me." Lady Eve tilted her head. "Are you I need to hear what they have to say." "Of course." She nodded, closed her eyes, and hummed. Caleb felt the tingle of magic in the air. She announced, "They'll be sent up immediately, my prince." Anthros pressed a hand against his chest. Excuse me, my princes and lady. He ran for the stairs, and an explosive cough escaped from his lips. Alsalon peered over the railing above the entrance. A fine time for him to fall ill. Perhaps he's just nervous about the battle, Caleb deadpanned. Moments later, Kelin, the dwarves, Finan, and Thalin hustled onto the tower. Boyson and Striggle each held a fat wooden mug in one hand. They bowed, but Caleb was barely paying attention. He sniffed. What's that? He pinched his nose. Golden brown liquid sloshed over the sides as Boyson gulped from the mug. Drink. Beside him, Striggle took a deep sip and said something that sounded like gravel rolling down a hill. Boyson nodded. Evelyn hid her suggestion of a smile behind her hand. He says he's not stupid enough to fight Kelin sober. You can understand them, my lady? Finan folded his hands in front of himself. Of course. Also, they're concerned about the child's eyes, but the boy has been loyal so far. Striggle downed the rest of his mug and rattled off words at a rapid pace. Evelyn nodded and replied in return. She turned to Caleb. They say Clan Heavyaxe will be our allies. They only regret they cannot send for an army before this battle, and they fear we might not win. He's not the only one, Kelin whispered. Caleb saw the human glance over the fields. The ranks of their enemies remained hidden in the mist, but the screaming of the Calvar seemed to shake the stones of the castle. Thalin peeked over the wall, and then he sat down and stared ahead. How did you arrive here in such haste? Caleb snapped his gaze to Finan. Finan bowed. We were being chased by Kelin. I honestly thought we wouldn't escape. We got lucky, Kelin added. Caleb scowled. People don't get lucky, not in these situations. Finan dropped his eyes. We did, my prince. We ran through a field of dead wheat and lost our pursuers there. And much to our surprise, they fled through a thin spot. I assumed they thought we escaped through it already and were continuing the hunt. They left it, unguarded and open? Finan nodded. Yes, my prince. We waited until nightfall and they had not returned. It took forever, Thalin interjected. We decided to chance it, and Amiri smiled on us. The Kemen had only left one guard for the thin spot on this world's side, and there was a tree path right there. We slipped through the ranks. How? Finan shook his head. They were still organizing. I think we were dirty enough to appear as cultists. We got to the rear of the castle, and our soldiers lowered a rope for us. Caleb exhaled and glanced at Evelyn, who nodded, but then he swung his gaze back to Finan. Well, I pray you may be so fortunate again. He strode over to the wall. You may rest instead of fight. You've been through enough. Finan bowed again. No, my prince. We will defend this castle for as long as we are able. Good. The light slipped away from Caleb's face as rising storm clouds overtook the sun.